After every long hospital shift, a quiet young nurse had a habit no one noticed. Before heading home, she would stop near the hospital gates and buy a warm meal for a man who sat there alone. He never asked. He never followed anyone. He simply waited, night after night. But one evening, as she turned to leave, something unexpected happened. The man gently held her wrist and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Child," he said, "you've helped me more times than you know. Tonight, let me help you. Don't take the road you always take," he warned. "Go the longer way. Walk through the city instead. Tomorrow," he added quietly, "I'll explain why." The words made no sense at the time, but listening to them would change everything. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, which country or state are you listening from, and how old are you? Now settle in, and let the story begin. Every evening, once her shift finally ended, Lena Voss followed the same quiet ritual. She washed her hands one last time, signed out at the nurse's desk, and stepped through the sliding doors of Mercy Central Hospital into the cooling night air. The sounds behind her, stretchers rolling, monitors beeping, voices calling for assistance, fell away the moment she crossed the threshold. Outside, the city breathed differently. Slower, colder, more honest. Lena had worked at Mercy Central for nearly 6 years. She wasn't the loud, commanding type of nurse that patients remembered by name. She didn't bark orders or dramatize emergencies. Instead, she moved steadily, spoke softly, and handled chaos the way water handles stone, without resistance, without pause. Patients trusted her not because she promised miracles, but because she never pretended. Few people knew about the small detours she took every night after work. Instead of walking directly to the bus stop like the other nurses, Lena veered toward the iron fence that bordered the hospital parking lot. There, on a low concrete ledge half hidden by shadows, sat a man who seemed to belong to the place as much as the building itself. He never called out, never begged, never followed anyone with pleading eyes. He simply sat. Some nights, he held a folded newspaper. Other nights, an empty cup rested near his feet. His coat was always clean, but worn thin, his gray hair neatly trimmed, his beard carefully kept, as if dignity was the last thing he refused to lose. Lena didn't remember when she had first noticed him, or when she learned his name. Somehow, it had just become known. Mr. Broderick. Each evening she bought something small before leaving the hospital grounds, a cup of tea, a warm pastry, sometimes soup if the night was especially cold. She never stayed long. She handed him the food, exchanged a few words, and moved on. No speeches, no pity, just quiet acknowledgement between two people who understood routine. That night, however, the routine cracked. The emergency department had been overwhelmed, 3 critical arrivals within minutes of each other. By the time Lena finished helping stabilize patients and complete paperwork, the clock above the nurses' station crept past 10. The city outside had grown sharper, the cold biting through fabric and into bone. She zipped her jacket to her chin and stopped at the kiosk near the hospital gate, buying 2 hand pies and a small cup of hot tea. In her bag she carried tangerines meant for her pregnant sister, their citrus scent bright and out of place in the winter air. Mr. Broderick was already there. He shifted slightly as Lena approached, making room on the ledge. She didn't sit, she never did, but she smiled and handed him the bag. "Thank you," he said, as always. His voice was low, steady. Lena turned to leave. That's when she felt it. A light, deliberate pressure around her wrist, not painful, not aggressive, just firm enough to stop her. "Child," Mr. Broderick said quietly, "you've fed me many times. Let me return the kindness." Lena froze. "Don't go home the way you usually do tonight," he continued. "Take the long route. Go through downtown instead. Tomorrow morning, I'll explain everything." The words landed wrong, like a sentence borrowed from another story and dropped into her life without permission. Lena pulled her hand back gently. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to laugh it off. "Why would I?" "Don't ask now," he interrupted, his calm suddenly edged with urgency. "Just listen. It will take longer. It will cost more. But you'll be safer." She searched his face for humor. Found none. Only worry. The street around them looked normal. A security guard smoked near the gate. Cars passed. People walked by without slowing. And yet, something in Mr. Broderick's eyes told her he had already seen a future she hadn't. Lena hesitated. She had ignored instincts before. Once, it had nearly cost her peace for months. "All right," she said finally. "Just for tonight." Mr. Broderick nodded once. "Come back here in the morning?" As Lena walked away toward the bus stop, an unsettling thought followed her like a shadow. What exactly had she just agreed to avoid? And more importantly, what would have happened if she hadn't listened? Lena believed she was simply taking a longer route home. She didn't yet know that one small decision had quietly stepped her out of danger and placed her directly into someone else's plan. The bus arrived with a tired hiss, doors folding open as if even the machine felt the weight of the late hour. Lena stepped inside and chose a seat near the front, close enough to the driver to feel less alone. The heater hummed softly, fogging the windows with a thin layer of warmth. She told herself she had agreed to the detour for a simple reason: caution, not fear. Outside, the hospital slid past in reflection. The fence, the gate, the bench where Mr. Broderick now sat alone again, already shrinking into the background of her life. Lena pressed her lips together, annoyed at herself. She was tired. Anyone would sound convincing after a 12-hour shift. Still, she didn't get off at her usual stop. Instead, she stayed seated as the bus turned toward downtown, the streets widening and filling with unfamiliar storefronts and glowing signs. The route added nearly 20 minutes to her commute. She checked her phone. No missed calls. No messages. Everything looked normal enough to dismiss the strange encounter as coincidence. At the transfer stop, Lena stepped off and pulled her jacket tighter around herself. A handful of people waited under the shelter, scattered and silent. One of them looked up. "Kinda late tonight, huh?" Her stomach tightened before her mind caught up. Kendrick. He lived in the apartment below hers. Mid-30s, friendly smile, always quick with small talk in the hallway. He wore a varsity jacket regardless of season and spoke with the easy confidence of someone who never felt threatened by the world. "Long shift," Lena replied. Kendrick nodded, glancing at the bag in her hands. "Food for home? Thought you practically lived at the hospital." She gave a polite smile. He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "If you want, I can walk you back. It's pretty quiet out." The words themselves were harmless, thoughtful even. But something about the timing made Lena's skin prickle. "No need," she said, surprised by how firm her voice sounded. "I'm heading through downtown anyway." Kendrick blinked. "Downtown?" he repeated. "That's not your usual way." "I need to stop somewhere," Lena said, shrugging. For a brief moment his smile tightened just enough for her to notice. Then it returned to normal, smooth and friendly. "Well," he said lightly, "suit yourself. Stay safe." The second bus arrived. Lena boarded and sat near the aisle. Kendrick got on too. That wasn't unusual, but he didn't take a seat. He stood nearby, one hand gripping the overhead rail, his reflection occasionally catching her eye in the window. Once she felt his gaze linger longer than necessary. When Lena stood to get off at her stop, Kendrick stood as well. "You sure you don't want company?" he asked, stepping off behind her. "That neighborhood's not great at night." "I'm fine," Lena replied quickly. "Really?" She walked faster. Her heart told her she was overreacting. Her body disagreed, pushing her forward with sharp urgency. She reached the next shelter, boarded the final bus, and didn't look back. By the time she unlocked her apartment door, it was past 11. The silence inside felt heavier than usual. Lena dropped her bag on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and stood still, listening. Pipes clicked. Somewhere above her, someone walked across their living room. Normal sounds, safe sounds. She drew the curtains and put water on to boil, determined to sleep. Sleep didn't come. Her thoughts circled the same questions. Why had Kendrick seemed so interested? Why had Mr. Broderick sounded certain, not suspicious? Why did coincidence suddenly feel like pattern? Near midnight, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Are you home? A cold wave washed over her. Lena stared at the screen. She didn't reply. She deleted the message, then immediately regretted it. 10 minutes later, another vibration. Kendrick. Hey, everything okay? You vanished. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She turned her phone face down and placed it on silent. The kettle screamed from the kitchen, startling her so badly she flinched. That night, every sound outside her door felt louder than it should have. And for the first time since meeting the quiet man by the hospital fence, Lena understood something chilling. Mr. Broderick hadn't warned her about a place. He had warned her about a person. By morning, Lena planned to ask the man by the fence for answers, but the truth was already knocking. Not at the hospital gate, but disturbingly close to her own front door. Morning arrived without relief. Lena woke before her alarm, her body heavy as if she hadn't slept at all. The pale light slipping through the curtains felt unfamiliar, almost intrusive, like it was exposing something she hadn't agreed to reveal. She lay still for a moment, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the hum of the city waking up. She checked her phone, no new messages. The silence should have comforted her, but instead, it made her uneasy. Silence could mean patience. At work, Lena moved through her tasks on autopilot. She smiled at patients, checked vitals, adjusted IVs, and answered questions with practiced calm. No one would have guessed that beneath her steady hands, something was tightening thread by invisible thread. During her break, she stood by the window overlooking the ambulance bay, replaying the night again and again. Kendrick's timing, his questions, the unknown number, and Mr. Broderick's eyes. When her shift ended, Lena didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the fence. Mr. Broderick was already there, sitting as if he hadn't moved since the night before. When he saw her, he rose immediately, not surprised, but relieved. "You came," he said. "You said you'd explain," Lena replied. Her voice was calm, but her fingers curled tightly around her bag strap. He nodded and gestured for her to stand closer, away from the passing crowd. "Last night, before you arrived, there were 2 men near this fence," he began. One talked on the phone. The other kept pacing, watching the hospital doors. Lena felt a faint pressure in her chest. "They spoke about a woman," he continued. "A nurse, always alone. Same schedule, same route home." Her mouth went dry. "I didn't hear names," Mr. Broderick said. "Didn't need to. I've watched you long enough to know who they meant." Lena swallowed. "Why didn't you call the police?" "Because by the time anyone arrived, they'd be gone," he answered simply. "And because men like that don't plan loudly. They test first. They watch." She hesitated, then asked the question she already feared the answer to. "Did you recognize either of them?" Mr. Broderick nodded once. "The one who waited? He comes around here often, pretends to be friendly, asks for cigarettes, asks questions he shouldn't." Lena's breath caught. "Kendrick." "Yes." The name settled heavily between them. "He followed you to the bus stop," Mr. Broderick continued. "Called someone when you didn't go the usual way. That's when I knew you'd listened." Lena stared at the pavement. Every polite smile, every hallway greeting replayed in her mind with new meaning. Control disguised as concern. Curiosity dressed up as kindness. "What do I do?" she asked quietly. "You don't stay silent," Mr. Broderick said. "You tell someone official. And until then, don't walk alone." That afternoon, Lena did exactly that. She spoke to hospital security. She adjusted her schedule so she left with other staff. And when Detective Aaron Cordell appeared in the Elator that day on unrelated business, she gathered her courage and asked for a moment. She told him everything. No exaggeration, no emotion, just facts. Cordell listened carefully, his expression serious but steady. He asked about the messages, about Kendrick, about the envelope of routine she'd lived inside for years without questioning. "You did the right thing," he said when she finished. "Now we document everything." For the first time since the warning, Lena felt supported, not protected, but believed. That evening, a guard walked her to the bus stop. Near her building, Kendrick stood by the entrance, smiling too quickly when he saw her. "Hey," he said. "Why haven't you been replying?" Lena met his eyes calmly. "My phone was off. Long shifts." He studied her face, searching for something. Then his smile returned. "Good night," he said. Lena walked inside without looking back. 3 days passed. No messages, no encounters. Just tension stretched thin. Then, one evening, she opened her door and found an unmarked envelope on the floor. Inside was a photograph. Her. At the hospital gate, taken from a distance. On the back, 3 words were written in dark ink. "Don't get smart." The warning had become a threat, and Lena finally understood. This was no longer about watching her routine. Someone was preparing to cross the line. Lena didn't scream. That surprised her most of all. She stood in the narrow hallway of her apartment, envelope in hand, breathing slowly through her nose, as if she were calming a patient instead of herself. The photograph felt heavier than paper should. Proof had weight. Intent had weight. She didn't touch it again. Instead, she slid the envelope back onto the floor, nudged it carefully into a clean plastic bag, and sealed it shut. Her hands were steady, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had sharpened her focus. Lena called Detective Cordell. He arrived within 40 minutes, moving through her apartment with quiet efficiency. He photographed the envelope, examined the print, and slipped on gloves before handling anything. "This changes things," he said at last. "This isn't curiosity anymore. This is pressure." Lena leaned against the counter, watching Kendrick through the kitchen window as he smoked in the courtyard below, relaxed, unaware, or pretending to be. The contrast made her stomach turn. "Is it him?" she asked. "Most likely," Cordell replied, "but we still need clean evidence." He explained the next steps calmly. Camera footage, entry logs, a controlled response, no confrontation, no panic. "One more thing," he added. "I'm going to ask you to help us." Lena didn't answer right away. "You'll come home earlier tomorrow," Cordell continued. "Turn on the hallway light. Act normal. Let the cameras do their work." She thought of the envelope, of the photo, of the message written with confidence, not haste. "I'm tired of being careful in silence," Lena said finally. "I'll do it." That evening, she followed instructions exactly. She returned home just after sunset, switched on the hallway light, and sat in her kitchen with the television murmuring quietly, not for entertainment, but to mask small sounds that could betray her nerves. Time stretched. 10 minutes passed, then 15. At 20 minutes, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. They stopped outside her door. Lena's pulse thundered, but she stayed seated, hands flat against the table. A faint metallic sound followed, soft, practiced. Someone testing the lock. Her phone vibrated. "Don't move," Cordell texted. "We're right outside." A muffled voice swore quietly. The handle jiggled once more. Then everything happened at once. Shouts, heavy footsteps, commands barked with authority. The sound of someone running, then being caught. Minutes later, Cordell knocked. "It's over," he said. Kendrick was arrested in the stairwell, lock-picking tools in his jacket, gloves in his pocket. His phone told the rest of the story. messages exchanged with another man, notes about Lena's schedule, comments about her apartment's location. She wasn't supposed to change her routine, one message read. Lena sat on the edge of her couch as Cordell explained. They hadn't planned violence. Not initially. They planned access, opportunity, control. They were waiting for you to visit your sister, Cordell said quietly. Empty apartment. Minimal witnesses. Lena nodded, unable to speak. After the officers left, she stood alone in her apartment, listening to the echo of her own breathing. The space felt different, now not violated, but reclaimed. The next morning she returned to the hospital fence. Mr. Broderick rose when he saw her. "You're alive," he said simply. "Yes," Lena replied, "because you spoke up." He waved her gratitude away. A man who sees danger and stays silent lives with it forever. She promised him soup, real soup, and help with his identification papers. For the first time, he smiled fully. Days passed. The city resumed its rhythm. Kendrick was charged. Others connected to him surfaced. Patterns emerged, women living alone, routines exploited, kindness mistaken for weakness. Lena changed too. She walked with others, paid closer attention, asked questions when something felt off, not fearful aware. One evening, as she left the hospital, escorted by security out of habit rather than necessity, Lena glanced at the fence one last time. Kindness hadn't endangered her. Predictability had, and awareness shared at the right moment had saved her life. Lena thought the danger had ended with the arrest. She didn't yet realize that understanding why she was chosen would change how she saw kindness and trust forever. The days after Kendrick's arrest were quieter but not peaceful. Lena returned to work as usual, yet everything felt slightly off, like furniture rearranged in a familiar room. She still knew where everything was, but her body needed a second longer to adjust. The hospital corridors looked the same, smelled the same, sounded the same, but Lena herself had shifted. It wasn't fear that followed her. It was awareness. Detective Cordell called her into a small consultation room one afternoon, a space usually reserved for families receiving difficult news. He didn't dramatize what he said. He never did. "We've been reviewing older cases," he explained. "Break-ins that didn't look violent. Missing documents, jewelry, cash, all tied to women who lived alone." Lena already knew where this was going. They all had routines, Cordell continued. Predictable schedules, same routes, same timing. And almost all of them were described as nice, helpful, quiet. Lena exhaled slowly. "They didn't choose me because I was careless," she said. "They chose me because I was consistent." Cordell nodded. "Exactly. Kindness wasn't the problem. Visibility was." That word stayed with her. Visibility. Back at home, Lena made small changes. She adjusted her schedule slightly, took different routes, paused before sharing casual details in elevators and hallways. It didn't make her suspicious of everyone, but it made her selective. One evening, she brought soup to Mr. Broderick as promised. Thick, warm, homemade. She also brought documents Cordell had helped prepare. "You don't owe me this," Mr. Broderick said, accepting the container. "I know," Lena replied. "That's why I'm doing it." They stood together in companionable silence for a moment, watching people pass. Some hurried, some laughed. Some stared at phones, unaware of how closely their lives brushed against others. "You ever wonder," Lena asked quietly, "how many times people are watched before something happens?" Mr. Broderick nodded, more times than they ever know. That night, Lena received a message, not threatening, not familiar. "Unknown number. He was asking about you again today." Her heart stuttered. She didn't panic. She forwarded the message to Cordell immediately. It turned out Kendrick hadn't acted alone. The man who had been feeding him information, the one who texted him about Lena's movements, had blended into the background perfectly. A casual acquaintance. A face that didn't stand out. someone who still hadn't realized the pattern was broken. Cordell assured her they were closing in. Still, the thought unsettled her. Danger didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it lingered, waiting for comfort to return. At work, Lena noticed small things now: a patient's hesitation before answering a question, a coworker forcing politeness where it didn't belong. She didn't judge, she observed. One night, as she left the hospital, a young nurse asked why security still walked them out. Because safety shouldn't wait for fear, Lena said. The words surprised even her. Weeks passed. The second man was identified, then arrested. The case slowly unraveled, revealing something disturbingly simple: opportunity built on silence. On a quiet evening, Lena stood at her window, looking down at the courtyard. Life continued. Children played, neighbors came and went. The world hadn't changed, but she had. Kindness, she realized, wasn't weakness. Unquestioned access was. She still helped people, still bought food, still spoke gently. But now she listened to timing, to tone, to the spaces between words, and that made all the difference. Lena believed the danger was finally behind her. But she hadn't yet learned how deeply the experience would echo, not just in her life, but in someone else's. Lena didn't announce that she had changed. There were no dramatic resolutions, no moment where she stood taller or spoke louder. From the outside, she looked the same calm voice, same steady walk, same habit of arriving early and leaving late. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. She no longer moved through the world on autopilot. At the hospital, she noticed how often people confused politeness with permission. A patient who asked too many personal questions. A visitor who lingered too long near the nurse's station. A delivery worker who seemed overly curious about staff schedules. None of it was alarming on its own. But Lena had learned that danger rarely introduced itself all at once. It assembled quietly. One afternoon, a new nurse named Mara joined the evening shift. Young, energetic, and eager to prove herself, she reminded Lena of who she'd been years ago. During a short break, Mara mentioned how she always walked home the same way because it felt familiar. Lena didn't interrupt her. She waited until Mara finished, then said gently, "Familiar can be comforting. Just don't let it become predictable." Mara laughed it off at first, but something in Lena's tone made her pause. That night, Lena spotted a man leaning too casually near the staff exit. He wasn't doing anything illegal. He wasn't aggressive. He was simply watching his lifting every time the door opened, phone lowered slightly when someone passed. Lena slowed her step. She didn't confront him. She didn't accuse. She caught the attention of security instead, describing him calmly, precisely. Within minutes, the man left. No scene, no drama, just prevention. Later, security thanked her. "Probably nothing," the guard said. "Probably," Lena agreed, but probably had nearly cost her everything once. At home, life settled into a new rhythm. She rearranged furniture, changed the placement of lamps, not because she was afraid, but because reclaiming space mattered. She wanted her apartment to feel chosen again, not merely occupied. One evening, she found Mr. Broderick speaking quietly with a woman near the fence. The woman looked tired, wary. Lena didn't interrupt. She watched from a distance as Mr. Broderick pointed subtly toward the hospital entrance, toward the guard booth, toward safety. Later, Lena asked him about it. She asked for directions, he said, but what she really needed was to feel seen. Lena nodded. She understood that now. Detective Cordell checked in periodically. The case had expanded. More connections. More patterns. It wasn't just about theft. It was about control. About identifying people who wouldn't make noise if something went wrong. "People like you," Cordell said once. Responsible. Independent, not prone to drama. Lena didn't like that description. She preferred capable. One evening, after a long shift, Lena received a message from an unfamiliar number. "You were smart to change." Her breath caught. She didn't respond. She didn't delete it either. Cordell traced it quickly. A burner phone. Discarded. Someone testing the perimeter one last time. "They're checking if you're still alone," Cordell said. "If you've gone back to normal." Lena looked at her reflection in the dark window. Normal was gone, and she had no intention of bringing it back. She went to the fence that night with soup and bread. Mr. Broderick accepted it with a nod. "Some lessons don't end," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "They just settle in." Lena walked home with security beside her, not because she needed it, but because it set a standard. And somewhere, someone was watching that standard change. Lena believed she had closed the door on the past. She didn't yet realize that someone else was deciding whether to open a new one. The message stayed on Lena's phone longer than she liked. "You were smart to change." It wasn't a threat. That was what unsettled her most. Threats carried emotion, anger, frustration, impatience. This message carried assessment. Someone had observed her choices and was quietly noting the results. Lena showed it to Detective Cordell the next morning. "Testing behavior," he said after a brief look. "They want to see if fear pulls you back into old habits." "It won't," Lena replied. Cordell studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good, because that's usually when people slip, when they think the danger has passed." At the hospital, life moved on. Patients came and went. Emergencies arrived without warning. Grief and relief brushed shoulders every hour. Yet Lena felt as if she were standing half a step outside it all, watching patterns form and dissolve. She noticed a man near the vending machines 2 days in a row. Not the same as the one from before. Older. Cleaner. He never spoke to anyone, but his eyes tracked the staff entrance more than the snack prices. On the 3rd day, he wasn't there. On the 4th, he was back, this time with a coffee, pretending to wait for someone. Lena felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not panic, recognition. She didn't approach him. She mentioned it to security. Cameras were checked, logs reviewed. The man left within minutes of noticing attention shift his way. "That's the 2nd one this month," the guard muttered. That night, Lena didn't go straight home. She stopped by the small grocery near the bus stop, changing her timing just enough to matter. As she walked out, she sensed movement behind her, not close, but aware. A reflection in the glass showed a figure across the street, phone lifted too high, gaze angled too deliberately. Lena turned suddenly. The man looked away at once, pretending to read something on his screen. He didn't follow when she crossed toward the lit main road instead of her usual shortcut. At home, Lena documented everything. Time, location, description. She sent it all to Cordell. "You did exactly right," he replied. "This is how pressure works. They test boundaries until resistance becomes inconvenient." But inconvenience didn't always stop people. 2 nights later, Lena found something new taped to her apartment building's notice board. It looked harmless at first, a handwritten flyer asking about a missing cat. But in the corner, barely noticeable, was a symbol Cordell had shown her earlier, a mark sometimes used by burglars to indicate interest. Lena removed the flyer and photographed it. That was when the reality settled in fully. This wasn't personal anymore. She was no longer the target. She was the example. Cordell confirmed it the next day. "They talk," he said. "People like Kendrick share stories. What worked? What didn't? You disrupted something." Lena felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Mr. Broderick listened quietly when she told him that evening. "When you close one door," he said, "others learn to knock softer." "Does it ever stop?" Lena asked. "No," he answered honestly. "But it changes." That night, Lena received another message from an unknown number. "We don't want trouble." She didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another message arrived. Just saying, "You're not worth it anymore." Lena stared at the screen, heart steady, mind clear. Good, she thought, because that meant something else had taken her place. Lena believed she had made herself invisible, but she hadn't considered what happens when danger moves on, and who it chooses next. Lena couldn't forget the final message. You're not worth it anymore. It wasn't relief she felt when she read it. It was dread. Because danger didn't disappear. It redirected. The thought followed her through her shifts, through crowded hallways and quiet moments at the nurse's station. If someone had decided she was no longer an easy target, then someone else had taken her place. And whoever that was probably didn't know they were being evaluated yet. The realization settled heavily in her chest. A week later, it became real. Murad, the young nurse Lena had gently warned about predictability, didn't show up for her shift. At first, no one worried. People ran late, phones died, life happened. But by midday, concern crept in. Mara was reliable. She texted when she was sick, she answered calls. This time, there was nothing. By evening, hospital administration contacted the police. Lena stood near the nurse's station as Detective Cordell arrived, his expression already tense. He asked a few questions, routine at first, then more specific ones. Does she walk home alone? Same route every night? Anyone notice someone hanging around recently? Lena felt a cold certainty take hold. She mentioned she always takes the same way, Lena said quietly, because it feels safe. Cordell's jaw tightened. Mara was found hours later, shaken but alive. Someone had followed her, tried to force her into a car near a poorly lit side street. She screamed. A passerby intervened. The attacker fled. It wasn't Kendrick, but the pattern was unmistakable. The hospital held a mandatory safety meeting the next day. Staff were encouraged to vary routines, walk in pairs, report anything unusual. Some listened seriously. Others nodded politely, eager to return to normal. Lena watched them and understood how easy it was to believe danger belonged to someone else until it didn't. Mara found Lena later that evening, eyes red, hands trembling. You tried to tell me, she whispered. I thought you were just being cautious. Lena placed a steady hand over hers. Caution keeps us alive. From that day on, Lena became something new within the hospital. Not a leader by title, but by presence. People asked her questions, trusted her instincts, followed her example. Security routines changed. Lighting was improved. Escorts became standard. Small changes, but meaningful ones. Mr. Broderick noticed it too. You've made noise, he said one night as Lena handed him soup. Not loud noise, the kind that shifts things. I didn't mean to, Lena replied. That's how it usually happens, he said. Still, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from farther away now. Not close enough to confront. Not careless enough to be seen, just close enough to wait. Weeks passed. The messages stopped. Reports slowed. The city exhaled. And then, one evening, Cordell called. We picked someone up, he said. Not for you. Because of you. The man had been part of a loose network, people who shared information quietly. Routines, habits, blind spots. Lena's case had exposed enough of the structure for police to unravel more than one thread. You weren't the end of it, Cordell said. You were the crack. Lena ended the call and sat in silence. She hadn't been brave. She hadn't fought anyone. She had simply listened, then acted. And in doing so, she'd changed the direction of something much larger than her own life. Lena thought the story was finally closing. But the truth was, she had just stepped into a new role. One she never asked for. And one she couldn't walk away from. Lena didn't want to be anyone's warning. She never imagined herself as a reference point in police briefings or a quiet example passed between hospital staff in lowered voices. Yet that was what she had become, a story people told to remind themselves to be careful. Remember what happened to that nurse? She noticed something early. She spoke up. It made her uncomfortable. Responsibility, she had learned, didn't always arrive with permission. Sometimes it settled onto your shoulders because you were the one still standing when others looked around. Life outside the hospital continued as well. Lena still bought groceries, still called her sister, still stood in line at the pharmacy like everyone else. But now, she noticed how often strangers asked questions that seemed harmless on the surface. "What floor do you live on? Do you usually work nights? Are you here alone?" Once, a man at the bus stop asked how long it took her to get home. Lena smiled politely and gave a vague answer. She didn't correct him when he assumed the wrong direction. Small boundaries, quiet defenses. Detective Cordell checked in less frequently now, which Lena took as a good sign. The network he'd mentioned had thinned. People scattered when patterns broke. They rely on routine more than force, Cordell explained during one call. When routine disappears, so do they. Still, one thing bothered Lena. The second man, the one who sent the final messages, had never been identified. His presence lingered like an unfinished sentence. One evening, as Lena walked toward the fence, she noticed Mr. Broderick wasn't alone. A man stood nearby, pretending to check his phone. He was clean-shaven, neatly dressed, nothing memorable about him at all. But when Lena slowed, so did he. Mr. Broderick met her gaze and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Lena didn't stop. She turned instead toward the guard booth, phone already in her hand. The man drifted away instantly, melting into the flow of people as if he had never been there. "You see?" Mr. Broderick said later, once they were alone. "Some men don't like witnesses." Lena nodded. "I don't think they like you," she said softly. "They don't have to," he replied. "They just need to know I'm watching." That night, Lena dreamed of doors. Doors left open. Doors quietly closed. Doors she had never noticed before. She woke with a decision already formed. The next day, she requested a meeting with hospital administration, not to complain, not to accuse, but to suggest lighting improvements, camera placement, clear reporting channels, mandatory safety briefings, not just after incidents, but as policy. To her surprise, they listened. Change didn't come overnight, but it came. Lena watched nurses walk out together. Security guards became more visible. Conversations shifted. And still something tugged at her. One afternoon, she received an envelope in her locker. No name, no stamp. Just a folded note inside. "You did good. But don't forget, someone is always watching." Her hands trembled for the first time in weeks. She reported it immediately. Cameras showed nothing useful. No fingerprints, no return address. Cordell was honest. This might be the last echo. Or it might be a reminder. Lena stood at her window that night, city lights blinking like distant signals. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she was alert. Because now she understood the truth that no one had ever taught her. Safety wasn't the absence of danger. It was the presence of awareness. Lena believed awareness was enough. She didn't yet know that the final test would force her to choose. Silence or intervention. The note stayed with Lena longer than she expected. Not physically, Detective Cordell took it the same evening, sealed it in an evidence bag, and logged it as potential intimidation, but mentally. The words echoed in her thoughts at odd moments, slipping in between routine tasks like an unwelcome whisper. Someone is always watching. Cordell had been honest. "This could be a final attempt to unsettle you," he said. "Or it could be someone reminding themselves that you noticed them." Neither option brought comfort. For a while, nothing happened. No messages, no strange figures near the fence, no unfamiliar faces lingering too long in familiar places. Life smoothed itself out, as if the city had quietly decided to move on. That, Lena knew, was usually when people stopped paying attention. At the hospital, a new rotation of staff began. Temporary nurses, interns, people who didn't yet know the rhythms of the building or the habits of the neighborhood. Lena found herself watching them the way she once watched patients alert for subtle signs of confusion, hesitation, misplaced trust. One evening, she noticed an intern named Jonah lingering near the staff exit, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low voice. That alone wasn't unusual. What caught her attention was the way a man across the street paused every time Jonah did. The man looked ordinary, mid-40s, neutral jacket. Nothing about him would stand out in a crowd. He wasn't staring, he was waiting. Lena slowed her pace. Jonah ended his call and stepped outside. The man adjusted his stance. Something inside Lena tightened, not with fear, but recognition. She could walk past, say nothing. Jonah wasn't her responsibility. She had no proof, no message, no threat. But she remembered the note. She remembered Mara. She remembered herself months earlier, stepping into the night without realizing she was already being assessed. "Jonah," Lena called gently. "You heading out?" He turned, relieved to see a familiar face. "Yeah, I was just going to walk home. Mind if I join you?" she asked casually. "I'm heading that way." The man across the street stiffened almost imperceptibly. They walked together toward the bus stop. Lena felt the shift immediately, the sense of attention withdrawing, like a hand pulled back too quickly. When she glanced behind them, the man was gone. Jonah chatted easily, unaware of how close something unseen had come. Lena didn't explain. She didn't scare him. She simply suggested varying his route, walking with others, staying alert. Later that night, she told Cordell everything. "You did the right thing," he said, "even if it turns out to be nothing." "That's what scares me," Lena replied. "It always looks like nothing." Cordell was quiet for a moment. Most people don't intervene because they're waiting for certainty. People like you act because you understand patterns. The next evening, Lena went to the fence. Mr. Broderick listened as she described what had happened. He nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. "You crossed the line tonight," he said. "Which line?" Lena asked. "The one between watching and acting," he replied. "That line costs people sleep. But it saves lives." Lena stood there longer than usual, the city flowing around them. She felt heavier not with fear, but with responsibility she hadn't asked for and couldn't ignore. When she finally turned toward home, she noticed something new. Across the street, near the edge of the light, someone stood watching, not her, but the fence, the spot where Mr. Broderick sat, the place where warnings had once been given. Lena didn't look away. Neither did the watcher. Lena thought the danger followed routines. She was wrong. It followed voices, especially the ones that refused to stay quiet. The watcher didn't move. That was what unsettled Lena most. He stood near the edge of the streetlight, far enough to remain indistinct, close enough to be intentional. He wasn't pretending to check his phone. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was simply there observing the fence, the bench, the man who had once spoken when silence would have been easier. Mr. Broderick noticed him too. "Don't stare," he murmured, eyes still forward. Men like that measure reactions. Lena forced herself to look away, though every instinct screamed to track the figure's movement. She said her goodnight calmly, as if nothing were out of place, and walked toward the bus stop with a steady pace she did not entirely feel. Only once she reached the shelter did she allow herself to glance back. The man was gone. At home, Lena documented the encounter the same way she documented everything. Now, time, location, clothing, behavior. No emotion. Just facts. She sent the report to Cordell before even taking off her shoes. His reply came quickly. "We've had similar sightings reported near that fence. You're not imagining it." That night, Lena slept lightly, waking at the smallest sounds. Not from fear, but from anticipation. Being watched had a rhythm. She was learning it. The next few days passed without incident. No messages, no envelopes, no unfamiliar faces lingering too long. but the absence felt deliberate, like a held breath. At the hospital, Lena noticed subtle changes. Security checks were more frequent. Cameras had been adjusted. Administrators didn't say why, but she knew. Someone had realized the fence was no longer just a place to sit. It was a variable. Mara stopped Lena in the hallway one afternoon. "Have you noticed it's quieter lately?" she asked. "Yes," Lena replied. "That's a good thing, right?" "Sometimes," Lena said carefully. "Quiet can mean people are listening." That evening, Lena arrived at the fence earlier than usual. Mr. Broderick wasn't there. That alone wasn't alarming. He moved around during the day, but something about the empty ledge tightened her chest. She waited a few minutes, scanning the area without making it obvious. Then she saw him. He was standing closer to the hospital entrance, speaking with a security guard. His posture was calm, but his hands were clenched. When he noticed Lena, he nodded her over. "They asked me some questions," he said once the guard stepped away, "about who I talk to, what I hear, and," Lena asked quietly, "and I told them the truth," he replied. "That I watch, that I listen, that I don't like trouble." "But trouble doesn't like being noticed," Lena said. Mr. Broderick gave a faint smile. "No, it doesn't." That night, Cordell called her directly. "We've identified the Watcher," he said. "Not a direct threat. Not yet. He's part of a group that monitors places where routines were disrupted. They're trying to understand why." "Why what?" Lena asked. "Why controls stopped working," Cordell replied. The words settled heavily. "They don't see you as the problem anymore," he continued. "They see the environment as the problem. You, Mr. Broderick, the fence, the attention." Lena closed her eyes briefly. "So what happens now?" Cordell exhaled. "Now they decide whether it's worth pushing back or walking away." Later that night, Lena stood at her window, looking down at the street. The city lights blurred slightly as fatigue caught up with her. She thought about how easily she could have stayed silent months ago. How nothing in her life had demanded courage until it suddenly did. She didn't feel heroic. She felt exposed, because being seen didn't just deter danger. Sometimes, it invited a response. Lena had learned how to notice danger. She had learned how to interrupt it, but she hadn't yet learned what happens when danger decides to respond. After Cordell's warning, Lena stopped expecting clear signs. Danger, she understood now, didn't always announce itself with footsteps or messages. Sometimes it changed shape, instead quietly adjusting, waiting to see who would blink first. The next few days felt unnervingly ordinary. No watchers near the fence. No strange messages on her phone. Mr. Broderick sat in his usual place, calm as ever, speaking only when spoken to. Security routines continued without incident. To anyone else, it would have looked like resolution. To Lena, it felt like repositioning. At the hospital, she noticed a new pattern emerging. People weren't watching her anymore. They were watching around her. A man asking an intern what time the evening shift usually ended. A woman lingering too long near the staff elevator, eyes tracking badges instead of faces. A delivery driver casually asking which nurses lived nearby. None of them crossed a line. That was the problem. Lena reported what she could, but Cordell was honest. "They're probing without committing," he said, "trying to see where resistance is strongest." "And if it is?" Lena asked. "Then they look for softer ground," he replied. That night, Lena walked with 2 coworkers instead of 1. They chattered about work, about weekend plans, about nothing important. Yet Lena noticed how often her companions glanced at their phones, how little attention they paid to their surroundings. Awareness, she realized, wasn't contagious. It had to be chosen. Near her building, Lena spotted something new. A small chalk mark near the curb, almost invisible unless you knew to look. Cordell had shown her similar symbols during their briefings, marks used to signal interest, risk, or timing. Lena didn't touch it. She photographed it, reported it, and went inside. By morning, it was gone. That afternoon, Mr. Broderick wasn't at the fence again. This time, Lena didn't wait. She found him sitting on a bench farther down the block, posture relaxed, but eyes alert. "They asked me to move along," he said quietly. "Said I was causing concern." "Were you?" Lena asked. "No," he replied. "But concern isn't always about danger. Sometimes, it's about disruption." The word landed heavily. Disruption. Lena thought about how many systems depended on people staying predictable, silent, grateful, how easily discomfort was reframed as a problem when it challenged control. "Are you scared?" she asked him. Mr. Broderick considered the question. "I've been scared before," he said. "This isn't that." That night, Lena received another message from an unknown number. "You're making things harder than they need to be." Her hands were steady as she forwarded it to Cordell. Minutes later, another message appeared. "People get hurt when they don't know when to stop." That one felt different. Not angry, not rushed, deliberate. Cordell called immediately. "This is escalation," he said. "Not imminent, but intentional." "What do they want?" Lena asked. Cordell paused. "Compliance. Silence. The old normal." Lena looked around her apartment, the rearranged furniture, the brighter lights, the locked doors she now checked twice. The normal they wanted no longer existed. "I can't give them that," she said. "I know," Cordell replied. "Which means they'll try something indirect next." After the call, Lena sat in the dark, listening to the city outside. She thought of Mara, of Jonah, of all the people who never realized they were being evaluated. She thought of the fence, the simple place where one man had chosen to speak. If silence was the currency of control, then attention was its opposite. And attention, once given, could not be taken back. Lena had refused to return to silence. Now she had to face the next question. What happens when pressure stops asking and starts forcing a decision? The next move didn't come at night. That was the first mistake they made. Lena had learned to expect pressure after dark messages, watchers, the feeling of being followed when the city thinned out and shadows grew longer. Daytime had always felt safer. Public. Witnessed. That illusion shattered on a quiet afternoon. Lena was restocking supplies in the treatment room when hospital security requested her at the front desk. Their tone was neutral, almost casual. Still, her pulse quickened the moment she saw the man waiting there. He was well-dressed, middle-aged, polite smile. The kind of face people trusted without remembering later. "Miss Voss?" he asked pleasantly. "I'm with City Services. Just need a moment of your time." Lena didn't sit. "What is this regarding?" she asked. "Community concerns," he replied smoothly. "Some reports about loitering near hospital property. A gentleman by the fence. Mr. Broderick." Lena felt a flash of anger, quick, hot, but she kept her voice even. "He isn't loitering. He isn't causing problems." The man smiled wider. "Of course. The complaints have been made. We'd hate for it to escalate unnecessarily." Escalate. The word was doing too much work. Lena crossed her arms. "If there's a formal issue, I'd like to see it in writing." The man hesitated, just enough. "There's no need for that yet," he said. "We're simply asking for cooperation." Lena nodded slowly. "Then you'll have to excuse me. I have patients waiting." The smile slipped for half a second before returning. "We'll follow up," he said. That was the moment Lena understood. They weren't trying to scare her anymore. They were trying to isolate the fence. That evening, she told Cordell everything. He was quiet for a long moment. "This is pressure through authority," he said finally. "Real or manufactured. They're testing how far they can go without crossing into something actionable." "So what do I do?" Lena asked. Cordell didn't hesitate. "You document, and you don't comply quietly." The next day, Lena requested a formal meeting with hospital administration, this time with documentation, witness statements, and security reports. She spoke calmly, clearly, and without accusation. "This isn't about one man," she said. "It's about visibility, about safety, about what happens when attention becomes inconvenient." The room was quiet when she finished. To her surprise, administration backed her. Security logs supported her claims. The so-called complaints couldn't be substantiated. The man from city services never returned. But something else did. That night, the fence was empty. Not because Mr. Broderick had moved, because someone had removed his things. The folded blanket, the cup, the small bag he kept tied to the rail. Lena's chest tightened. She found him 2 blocks away, sitting on the steps of a closed storefront. "They told me it was better if I wasn't near the hospital anymore," he said calmly. "Said it would reduce tension." "Did they threaten you?" Lena asked. "No," he replied. "They didn't need to." Lena sat beside him for the first time. "I won't let this stand," she said quietly. Mr. Broderick looked at her, really looked. "Be careful," he said. "Some lines once crossed don't let you step back." Lena met his gaze. "I crossed mine months ago." Across the street, a familiar figure watched from a parked car engine running, lights off. Lena didn't look away. She took out her phone and made the call. They thought removing the fence would end the problem. They didn't understand. The fence was never the center of it. Lena was. The call Lena made wasn't emotional. That surprised her later when she replayed it in her mind. Her voice hadn't shaken. Her words hadn't rushed. She simply stated facts, location, description, behavior. She described the parked car, the engine idling, the man who didn't bother pretending anymore. Detective Cordell arrived with 2 patrol units. Not lights and sirens. Not drama. Precision. By the time the officers approached the vehicle, the driver had already stepped out, hands raised, irritation etched across his face rather than fear. He looked offended, like someone interrupted in the middle of something important. They found nothing illegal at first glance. No weapons, no stolen property. Just a phone filled with notes, photos, and names. Patterns. Lena watched from a distance as Cordell flipped through the evidence, his jaw tightening with every swipe. "This isn't just observation," he said quietly. "This is coordination." The man was detained for questioning. Not arrested, not yet. But the pressure shifted in a way Lena felt immediately, like a room exhaling after being sealed too tight. Mr. Broderick sat silently beside her on the storefront steps. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "Yes," Lena replied. "I did." That night, she didn't go straight home. She walked with Mr. Broderick to a late-night cafe a few streets over. It wasn't warm or welcoming, but it was bright and visible. They sat at a small table by the window, steam rising from cheap coffee. "They think silence is weakness," Mr. Broderick said after a while, "and attention is aggression." "They're wrong," Lena replied. "Attention is accountability." The following days moved quickly. Cordell called twice. The man in the car had talked carefully, defensively, but enough. Names surfaced. Connections formed. The group wasn't large, but it was practiced. They didn't commit crimes themselves. They mapped routines, flagged locations, nudged circumstances. Predators without fingerprints. And now, exposed. Hospital administration reinstated the bench near the fence. Security presence became permanent. Lighting was upgraded. Official notices were posted, not warnings, but policies. Visibility had been institutionalized. Mr. Broderick returned to his spot 2 evenings later. Nothing about him had changed. Same posture, same quiet presence. Yet Lena noticed people greeted him now. Security guards nodded. Nurses smiled. The fence no longer belonged to the shadows. One afternoon, Mara joined Lena as she walked toward the bus stop. "I heard about what you did," she said hesitantly. "With the administration." With the police. Lena smiled faintly. I didn't do anything alone. Mara shook her head. You could have stopped after you were safe. Yes, Lena agreed. But then someone else wouldn't be. That night, Lena received one final message from an unknown number. You've made this too public. She stared at it for a long moment, then handed the phone to Cordell when he arrived minutes later. Good, he said. That means it's over. How can you be sure? Lena asked. Because control doesn't survive daylight, Cordell replied. And you turned on the lights. Lena walked home feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Lightness. Not because nothing could happen again, but because she knew now how to respond if it did. She stood at her window, looking down at the street, at the fence, at the ordinary flow of life continuing beneath it all. She thought of the night she almost went home the usual way. How close the line had been. How quietly it had tried to claim her. Lena believed the story was ending. But every ending leaves behind a question. What remains after danger is gone? And who do you become because you noticed? Nothing dramatic marked the end. No headlines, no speeches, no moment where the city paused to acknowledge what had changed. Life simply continued quieter, steadier, less careless. Lena noticed it first in the smallest ways. Nurses lingered a little longer before leaving together. Security guards walked people out without being asked. The fence near the hospital was no longer just a boundary, it was a landmark, visible, occupied, acknowledged. Mr. Broderick sat there most evenings again, not as a warning, not as a symbol, just as a man who had chosen, once, not to look away. Lena still brought him soup when she could. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. Silence, she had learned, wasn't dangerous on its own. It was only dangerous when it was chosen out of fear. Detective Cordell checked in one last time a few weeks later. The network dissolved, he said. Not because we arrested everyone, because attention made it inefficient. That's it? Lena asked. That's usually it, he replied. Most systems built on control can't survive being seen. After the call, Lena sat on her couch and let the quiet settle, not the tense quiet of waiting, but the honest quiet of space reclaimed. She thought about how close she had come to never knowing, how easily kindness could have been her undoing, how predictability had once felt like safety. She hadn't become suspicious of the world, she had become awake to it. At the hospital, Lena was still the same nurse, steady, calm, unremarkable in the ways that mattered. But younger staff watched her now. Not because she told them what to do, but because of how she moved through the world. She didn't rush, she didn't overshare, she didn't dismiss instincts as imagination. One evening as she prepared to leave, a new intern asked casually, "Is it really that important to change routes?" Lena paused, then smiled gently. "It's not about roots," she said. "It's about not letting anyone believe they know you completely." That night, Lena walked past the fence and toward the bus stop with a small group of co-workers. Laughter drifted between them, light and ordinary. Behind them, the city moved as it always had, cars passing, phones glowing, lives intersecting without introduction. Danger hadn't vanished. It never does, but it had lost something important. Its certainty. Lena looked back once more, catching sight of Mr. Broderick holding his warm container of soup, watching, not with worry, not with pride, but with quiet peace. A man who had done the right thing and lived with the cost. Lena understood now that courage didn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looked like paying attention, like speaking once, clearly, when silence would have been easier. Sometimes it looked like choosing a longer way home. She stepped onto the bus and took a seat by the window, the city lights sliding past in reflection. The road ahead was familiar, but no longer predictable. And that, she knew, was exactly how it should be. Kindness is not weakness. Silence is not safety. and routine is only comfort until someone else memorizes it. Sometimes, the smallest act, a warning spoken, a habit broken, a voice refusing to stay quiet, is enough to change the outcome of an entire life. So, how did this story make you feel? I'd love to know which city you're listening from. Tell me in the comments below. Your support truly means more than you realize, and I read every single response. If this story stayed with you, you'll find 2 more meaningful life stories on your screen right now that I think you'll really enjoy. There are many more heartfelt stories waiting for you on this channel. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until our next life story. Take care, and thank you for listening.